Hey, what's going on? Just wanted to say a few things before we get into the podcast. Number one, I want to thank Miss Linda White for joining us on this specific podcast. This is episode 2, History After Hours podcast. I want to thank her. Unfortunately, her mic cut out towards the end of the podcast, so if you hear some dead time, that's what's going on there, so sorry about that. Just want to also say that our views that we represent here on these podcasts do not necessarily reflect those of Lakeside High School. Just want to get that out there as well. For the next podcast, we actually want you guys to submit questions via Twitter. And you can do this at History Hours PC on Twitter and give us some questions. And the next podcast, we will try to answer those. So without further ado, here is episode 2. Hello and welcome to another episode 2 of History After Hours podcast. This is for Tuesday. We're recording this September 29th, 2015. How's it going? How are you doing, everyone? With me today is Ron Franklin. Say hello.
What's up?
Hey, and we have a special guest this time. It is Miss Linda White.
Here I am.
There she is. Okay, so we're going to talk about several topics today. We're going to try to dive into the whole Trump fiasco and how everybody is reacting to that. We're going to talk a little bit about social media a little bit later.
Marco Rubio called him a freak show, if you want to get real specific there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
so
throw that word out there for us.
That, and then at the end of the thing, we're going to try to talk about some rock bands and who are the most influential rock bands, maybe the Mount Rushmore of rock bands or whatever. So let's get this ball rolling. So let's just talk about the Republican Party in general. Obviously, they are the focus. You have about, I think there's 1,032 of them running for president now.
Give or take, yeah.
And they have their talking points. So, guys, what did y'all watch the debates?
I did.
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm.
So, what was your impression? I mean, both debates were similar, I guess. What were your impressions? Just give me your initial reactions.
It's the same talking points that we've seen really from the first ones. I mean, they spent the first 15 to 30 minutes just attacking each other. And that's,
junior high is what I tell my kids.
It seems very it's juvenile to a certain extent, and you're not really hearing any real debate. It's not a formal debate. They're taking this as an opportunity to try to cut each other down as quickly as they can to try to score some talking points. And I would assume that they've practiced those well ahead of time, except for probably Trump himself, who seems to speak off the cuff most of the time. But it's the main things that you're going to hear from folks are what they think people want to hear. Basically, they're going to talk about, well, they were at the Reagan Library, basically. So we're going to talk about Reagan. Mm-hmm. We're going to pump that as many times as we can to try to get people thinking that we're like him. You're going to hit on the Planned Parenthood, which is a big thing. They're going to talk about the immigration, and then they're going to talk about each other's careers and policies, even though we haven't seen a lot of policies yet. But really, it's just kind of a snap fest to see who's going to take on who.
Isn't it surprising that remember when they asked the question, who should be on the new currency, the $10 bill, the woman, and they say, my wife, my mother, all that. I heard somebody, and I can't remember who now, somebody listening might have heard it, and they said, why not Nancy Reagan? She was sitting right there looking at them. If you're going to try to, reverence Reagan, that would have been a good person to say, but nobody said it.
Well, as a woman watching that, I thought they were, they didn't take it seriously. To me, as a woman, I don't know who I would choose. I particularly don't think any woman should be replace a person already on the currency. Maybe a new currency.
You're the only one from this panel that can say that.
A new currency?
Yeah.
Like what?
And my kids, I brought up to my students. Some of them said maybe a $3 bill. Some of them $2 bill, not knowing about $2 bills. And I kind of agree with that. I don't see why anyone needs to be replaced.
Is Susan B. Anthony already on like the $50 or something?
She was on I think, wasn't it $1 coin?
Yeah, it was $1 coin, yeah.
Right. I don't know. Me being an American history guy, it would be difficult to replace Hamilton on the $10. Totally. He was on the $10 bill because he was kind of responsible for a lot of our economics.
Yeah.
I don't know. Somebody had mentioned Jackson replacing him on the 20 because, he wasn't the sweetest fella. But I don't know.
I'm too much of a traditionalist, I guess. I just can't see as a woman, I can't see replacing with a woman. and some of the ones they suggested. You know, that was a Miss America question.
Right.
They asked that at the Miss America contest.
Really?
Yes.
No, I didn't.
And they asked it at Miss Arkansas.
So it's a hot topic question to ask
Yeah.
right now, and it came out on the presidential debates.
Which surprised me.
I don't know that it's something that needs to be discussed on a presidential panel, but I mean, it's a worthwhile topic. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's not policy per se. You know, if you want to talk about,
I was surprised. I just thought they said that as a funny, and I didn't think it was funny.
Yeah, I guess they're just trying to. They asked a couple questions there towards the end to make it a little bit lighter than it was. I loved it. Of course, once again, we're talking mainly about Trump and the spectacle that is Trump. I loved it when, who was it? Was it Christie that was talking about his temperament, like the first question, and he immediately attacked Rand Paul? I thought, oh gosh,
yes.
Well, there you go. That answers his temperament. Hey, Rand Paul shouldn't be on here. He's 1% of the vote.
well, I mean, obviously the questions are going to be geared towards the person they think most people want to hear from, and so since the polling has been reflective that Trump is in the lead or has been so far, they're going to direct most of the questions towards him, whether he really has an answer or not. I think the people just wanted to see what type of answer he would give, because to me, it's not really a debate. It's more about trying to entertain people. You know, what nasty thing is he going to say next? And it's a ratings thing. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So I'm really disappointed with the format that we've had over the past few, and you won't get into some serious policy issues until we see smaller panels, I suppose. But yeah, it was just kind of a free for all, really.
Well, when they said they were going to go around and let everybody introduce themselves, they just immediately went into their talking points, like it was, and then half of them spoke the name Reagan somewhere in their introduction of themselves.
That's because you have to. That's what I said a while ago. You have to touch that stone and say, pay homage to.
And that's another question I've got for you guys. When did Reagan hit this status of divine nearly? I mean, he died in 2004, but I don't remember him being talked about even during Clinton's presidency as this. I mean, I've always knew he was a great president. He was very influential. People admired him, but this status that he has now, the Republican candidates, they can't even admit that he ever made a mistake.
Oh, he's been elevated. And, this is, I don't know, when do you think that happened, Linda? During second term Bush?
Probably.
Post 9/11?
Yeah. That's because the Republican Party is grasping for straws right now. That's the last bright spot that I can remember as far as having. I was Reagan from the beginning. I was Reagan when he was a movie star. Okay,
and there you go.
I mean, I've always known him when he ran for, when he was in California, and he ran so many different times to be president that I've just always been a fan. And he was so the American, and they're looking for something like that. So they're trying.
It's Morning in America, wasn't that his? Yeah, he was in his tough guy attitude, his swagger. He had something about him. Of course, he was known as the great communicator. Right?
Well, and he's a holdover too from the McCarthy era, where we're going to hunt down anti-American, that he had that kind of feel about him, president of the Screen Actors Guild and all of that. So people knew who he was, and he had that. But I think that you've really hit on something there when you said that they're searching for something to give them some sort of cohesion. And, and this is something that we conversed with a little bit in the hall. And I know we've kind of strayed away from Trump a little bit, but we'll come back to him. I'm not sure that Reagan, giving his given his track record as governor of California, would actually be able to gain the Republican nomination if he were running today, based on that track record. Because there's this strange, they've strained themselves to try to reach some sort of ideological height that is really unachievable. I mean, for example,
he did raise taxes.
Well, right, that's what I'm saying. They'll say we can't. Any moderate-mindedness is demonized, and that's not going to work with inside the party today. Right? They will not allow anyone who seems like they're going to be willing to cooperate with Democrats or independents to be the spokesperson of the party. And Reagan was very purposeful in reaching across the aisle and finding different things to accommodate so that he can get some things done. I mean, you talk about great communicator. Here's a guy who was willing to. I mean, he had his principles. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But at the same time, was willing to reach out, and he did do some things that, especially think about California. I mean, he signed an abortion a bill that allowed abortions to take place, and that therapeutic abortions is what they called it, and to allow that to under certain circumstances. He does raise taxes multiple times, even as president. And he's going to. They focus on this idea of trickle down economics, but really he was going to put more money in the system and bloat the size of government in order to have the programs that he wanted in place. So I don't know. I think that we could argue it out. I don't know that if Ronald Reagan was running today that he could be the Republican nominee.
Yeah, that's a good point. And by the way, if you're screaming at your computer or whatever you're listening to, we will criticize Democrats as well. I mean, we're going to criticize. We're not one side or the other necessarily. This is what we do in our class. We try to make the students guess. What do you think I am? And usually they have no clue.
Mine usually guess by the end of the year.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't tell them.
Right.
They just know by my actions.
Yeah. I always play devil's advocate to the best, no matter
And
what
I do
they
that
say.
too.
Yeah. Makes them think a little bit. So we're you got Carson, you got Trump. What is obviously they're sensational. Well, Carson's not. He's a little bit laid back. But Trump is sensational. He is polarizing. But he's also got something that I haven't seen in that. I mean, you mentioned Ross Perot. You mentioned some of these. But he's independent in a way that no one else is. And he says that if he elected president, that he'll be able to work with Congress. But, man, this guy has no attachments. He's not really party affiliated, although he's running as a Republican.
There's a lot of negative commentary about him, and I do appreciate the people calling him out on just the circus sort of atmosphere that he puts out there. But I think it's intriguing. I read an op-ed on him in a Rolling Stone magazine where they talked about how this may actually be a good thing for democracy, because here's a guy who is not holding to anybody, someone who is financing his own campaign, someone who doesn't owe anybody any favors, says what he thinks, even if it's the most blunt thing that would, he thinks it comes out of his mouth. He doesn't care who he's offending. And that's refreshing to a lot of folks who have been caught up and really angered by the amount of political correctness inside the system and people not really willing to say what they think and feel and trying to push for a specific agenda. And at least he's got that going for him. So, I mean, think what you will of him. He is a brand all his own, and that is enticing to a lot of folks.
Oh, I totally agree with that. He's making you rethink what you think that you know about politics. And he is, even though I can't remember, I've seen so many interviews with Trump. If he is, his big thing was immigration to begin with.
Right.
And I think during the debates, he kept saying, we're only talking about this because I brought it up, because I brought it up, because I brought it up. Well, my opinion, he really has put the focus on it. We've had so many presidents and so many administrations, state level, federal level, that are talking about immigration, and then they just pass it on to the next administration. And there hasn't been anything done.
So what you're saying then is at least he is, even if what he's saying is pretty egregious, that at least he's opening a door for dialogue about a problem that needs to be addressed.
That's what I think.
But at the same time, don't you think the less educated would be more attached to him, because he brings these topics up? He says some things that are very pro-American, but he doesn't really go into how he's going to do it. We're going to deport this many people. That is a nice thing to say that a lot of people will immediately gravitate towards. This new thing that came out, he released his tax plan yesterday. I'm going to just cut taxes left and right.
I saw that.
People will immediately gravitate towards that, but at the same time, they don't really think it through. How's this going to affect our debt? How's this going to,
Well, it's a populist thing to say.
Yes.
I'm going to say things that I think that people want to hear, and they will give me applause lines. And so, but he's saying these ideas, and he is getting some attention. But I think that you're right. I think you've latched onto something. A lot of the support is coming from people who aren't thinking that through. What is the end game if this really goes about this direction? You cannot build a gigantic wall and make Mexico pay for it. I don't care how many people think that they support that. That's a horrendous idea. The idea that you can cut taxes the way he's saying to cut them and shrink the deficit it's ridiculous. It will not happen that way. You cannot come up with enough money. If you look at what he said, how many different ways he's going to cut taxes and whom he's going to cut them on, it's not feasible. And and serious economists are going to start calling him out. As a matter of fact, they already have. You can read things through the Washington Post or even with New York Times. I've read several accounts on that already, and they're just blasting away at it.
It's easy to say I'm going to cut spending, or I'm going to reduce taxes here, here, and here, and it's going to be these percentages. And then he'll go, and I'll also cut government spending. But you don't get specific with that. So what are you going to cut? Are you going to cut defense? No, he's probably going to increase that. You're going to cut education? No, I'm not going to do that. You're going to cut Social Security? No, you can't touch that.
You can't touch it or Medicare. Those are mandatory.
I mean, what are you going to cut? I mean, you could say, I'm just going to cut welfare or something. But come on. You got to be... And I think we also, don't we, as an American public, give way too much credit and or blame to the president? I mean, how much power? I know he's powerful, but he does have to work with Congress and within our system. He's not all powerful.
Right. You're not going to stand up there and pump your fist and call people names and all of a sudden the problems in America are going to be fixed. You have to work with inside the system. It's why we have a system. I mean, you as a civics teacher, you harp on that. We have those things.
I know, and students every year, I've been doing this over 10 years with civics. They always give the president more power than he actually or she will actually have.
You can't.
One of these guys say that they were going to make all chargers the same, like for your iPhone. Like we got some for Android that are this way. Does the president have that kind of power to dictate corporate?
It's chargers? Amazing, right? Though, that's what you get when you have an uneducated voting base.
Right.
Yes.
People who will say, I want him to fix the problems, and people who think that there are these massive problems that, and granted, we have issues, but at the same time, how they're addressed, you can't just stand there and go, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. You have to work through the system, and Congress has to actually pass laws that then you can go off and try to enforce.
And the uninformed are who I think is the Trump base right now.
Yeah, but don't you also think
they just sit on the surface?
Don't you think that that's going to be a mistake ultimately for him to pander to that particular base, because they're typically not going to go vote.
Hey, maybe
typically
he's charging them up.
Typically not going to go vote.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying that hasn't been sort of the norm up to this point. Well, they'll talk a good game, but then they'll sort of let it slide. And
that's true.
Yeah, one of the other things we talked about is our polar opposite two-party system that we're working within. Now, there have been times in American history where the parties were a lot closer together on different issues. I mean, both parties, if you go back far enough, I teach about this, a paradox in American history is both parties supported the revolution. They come out of that. But typically we've had a two-party system. I have never seen it so polarized. The left is far left and the right is far right. And it's going to take somebody that's going to have to get these guys to work together. All
right, so what would it take really for a third party to rise up in this country? I mean, look at Britain. They have a Labor Party. They have the Conservative Party. They have socialist parties. You have 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 political parties. And, not saying that we need that many per se, but why not? Who cares? Why are we so determined to just allow these two entities to control American politics? I don't really have an answer for that.
I don't either.
But that's the case. But if you run as an independent, you are outgunned. You're out. You can't fight them with money. Like I said, unless you get a guy like Trump who is personally successful in his own right and doesn't need their money. But anybody else is probably going to be. You mentioned Perot, which was an interesting. He
Teddy
comes up with his own money.
Ran as an independent after he lost the Republican nomination.
But you don't have one that stays. You don't have a true third party that actually hangs out there and challenges these other two. The best you can hope for is somebody who will bring up some points that will eventually be adopted into the platform of the other two parties. But they take it or leave it however they wish.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to get out of the system that we're currently in. And some of the Republicans are way more right than others. There's some moderates. And it's just, and we'll talk about the Democrats when they start emerging and start doing their debates. But the Republicans have to do such a tap dance to get the vote.
All right, so
then they have to tap dance back to the left once they get to the general election, which makes them look like Romney did as flip-floppers. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what do they really think?
What about Boehner? I'm going to throw this in there too, because he just decided that he was going to step down this past week. And from what I've read, the push that ultimately sent him to say, this is the time, he'd been thinking about it for a while, apparently, anyway. Mm-hmm. But this whole fight over Planned Parenthood and the defunding or whatever it's going to be, and are we going to shut the government down? And he did not have the votes together to try to make that happen or to try to push it one more time. They've shut the government down several times. Well, actually, they're not going to say that. It's going to say the other side wouldn't cooperate with us, and therefore we had to shut down because they're unwilling to. So we can argue that point too. But from his own sort of camp, you hear that he's just, I am basically tired of the struggle back and forth with the radical elements inside the Republican Party. And so, like you said, they're dancing one direction to pander to the very rightist evangelical base. But then when it comes time, that's not going to be the thing that actually gets them voted in. And so they have to kind of go back the other way. And then they get attacked. And I think the man was just tired of being attacked. Do you feel that same way, or am I just kind of just grasping at things there?
I'm just wondering if it was his personal decision to step down, or
that's interesting. Was he pushed?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
But I would personally be tired of messing with it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, how long has he been the speaker?
Several years. I'm trying to think when Pelosi's had to step down. How many years has it been?
I don't know. I don't know exactly how many years, but it's been
evidently too long.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans have had control for a long time. I don't know when the actual date was, but it's been a long time. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out, and it's just there's a big part of me that's so glad Trump is in it to shake things up from your normal. I mean, obviously,
I agree.
The politicians that have to also react to him are having to do a different dance than they're used to.
Well, look at Jeb Bush.
Yeah,
he's got to be totally. It's almost, this is my thoughts. Okay, these are my thoughts. That when Hillary Clinton ran before and Obama all of a sudden is on the scene,
right.
How much did she know before then that, I don't think she was prepared for that blast from Obama.
Didn't seem to be.
So, and Jeb Bush, I think, is in the same boat right now.
Oh, yeah, he's on his heels.
Like, 7%? 8%.
It's low, but when it comes time, this is the point I was trying to make a while ago.
And it's
when
so
we
far
get
away.
closer to the actual election or the nomination for the party, who's going to emerge? I really don't think that Trump is going to be able to solidify enough of a voting base to actually come out and bring him to be the guy. Carson's coming on strong, but if you notice what's happened with him as a connection with kind of the Trumpism, is that as soon as he made his statements about the Muslim presidencies or whatever, he took a giant bounce forward.
Yes.
But these are all in opinion polls. These aren't.
And a lot of the polls, it's just Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, so I take it with a grain of salt, I think. So I'm still not too clear on who the person's going to be. I really don't know.
Oh, I have no idea.
Let's talk for just a minute because we're getting close to our time. But I wanted to throw in a little bit about social media, whether it's Facebook, mainly Facebook because a lot of old people are on Facebook, but Twitter.
Yes, me.
Twitter and other things, like how that has changed politics. And what I mean by that, in the last 10, 15 years, you can have a guy that's lived in his basement his whole life, and he can Photoshop and tweet out things or post things that are ridiculous. And people, if it agrees with what they already think at all, they'll just share that stuff. And so before long, you have thousands of people looking at misinformation.
Oh, you know what it is? It's lone wolf propaganda.
Yeah.
I'll just say something to get attention, no matter what it is, and there's nobody to stop me. And like I said, we had a little bit of this conversation the other day to kind of get this rolling. When you have, before social media, let's say, and you have things that are being presented in the media, you're going through a publication, a press release, or most people are getting news from newspapers. You talked about your father.
Yep.
He opened the paper every morning, he read through it, and this is where you get our news. And in the newspaper, something that's published, especially the industry that's going to sort of monitor itself to a certain extent, if somebody says something stupid, I mean, there are editors, there are people who are going to check that, and then there are other papers who will double check what they're saying, and they'll call each other out. With social media, you don't have that. Even a smidge of check and balance. It's you think it, you can say it, and if you can get it retweeted enough, especially if it's outrageous, it sort of becomes part of the social consciousness, and there's no stopping that. There's absolutely, I don't see, you can't filter it apparently, or at least we don't. I know other countries try. True.
Well, I was talking to him yesterday about internet media could run a story. They rush with it because they want to be first. It could be completely inaccurate. 10,000 people see it. Then they go away thinking it's true. And then 5 minutes later, they might post a correction. Or maybe they don't.
But those 10,000 people have already reposted it.
Right. And so then it's just boom, it spreads. And so it's really hard in our culture and with social media especially to figure out what's true, what's misinformation, what is spun by the media. I mean, everybody spins it to get its ratings. So we're just living in a very different atmosphere.
To add to that point, though, too, is that you watch major news networks or you listen to what they're saying, and they have a segment that will talk about social media. Here's what's trending on social media. Like it's news, and it's not. Because what they've they've transformed from news sources to people who are telling you what they think you want to hear. And that's a very different scenario. Telling me what I already think I know is not the same thing as telling me what's going on.
Yeah.
Cronkite.
When you reported the news instead of trying to get the ratings, even on the news they're trying to get the ratings.
Yeah. When
think about the
now,
competition.
just like us, like people now, we go to imright.com and that's the only thing we're going to watch anyway. I mean, people generally watch one thing, one brand of newscasting, and it's so spun a certain way to get those people to watch it in the first place that you never know how true it is. I don't know. It'll all, I guess, wash out, as they say. We'll figure out who's going to be there. We'll continue probably talking politics.
When really, just to throw in on the other side, and I'm back to politics. Like, do you think that Biden's going to jump in? Do you think that Joe Biden is going to jump into the race?
I don't.
Do you think he should, though? If nothing else, to give her some sort of sounding board, because right now it's her and the socialist, and a lot of people are going to be afraid of that. But to give her some sort of somebody who has more, and again, nothing is Bernie Sanders per se, but they're very different in how they're going to approach debating things, and I think that her and Biden may be a little more similar, which gives, like I said, it gives a different atmosphere if he jumps in. I'm not sure he will. I just wondered what you thought.
No, I don't think he'll jump in, and I think if it just, I'm waiting for, who will be in the Democratic debates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it going to be Hillary against Hillary?
Well, I think if Joe Biden does decide to run, it's going to be calculated. He's got people around him telling him, all right, you need to wait. Let's see how this plays out. And, I think that's probably part of it. Okay, so we have chewed up roughly 27 minutes, and what we do at the end of all our podcasts is we rank things just because, well, I don't know where that comes from. I'm a sports guy, so I have a big wall influence people. I always like to debate who's the best, what's the worst, whatever. So we're going to pick a random topic, and today we decided to talk about the greatest rock bands. And I know we're all probably music people to some degree. Greatest rock bands to ever live. Now that could be by influence, impact. It could be your own personal thing. I've got Rolling Stone's top 100 artists, which a lot of these bands, they have the Beatles as number one. Is there any dispute that the Beatles are the greatest rock band to ever live? I mean, great, of course, is a personal thing, but definitely influential. It's hard to argue, I guess. You've got Rolling Stones.
So who else is on the list? Here
we go. This is just bands. I'll just give you a few here. The Beatles, they have number one. Their second band is Rolling Stones. Their third is the Beach Boys.
Beach Boys and the Beatles actually had a gigantic competition between themselves to see who was going to come up with the most interesting album. There was a direct competition between those two groups. I don't know a lot of people know
well,
that.
the Beach Boys were huge.
Yeah. For
a while, of course,
they were trying to outdo each other. Like they were trying to top each other's albums.
Well, I was very young, junior high, when I was starting. Like when the Beatles hit America with their number one hit, I think it was "I Want to Hold Your Hand." I was sixth grade. Okay, because I remember walking around and and then the Beach Boys, and then Jammie Dean, and all that Beach Boys stuff hit. I personally wasn't a Beach Boys fan.
We think about people though that change the direction of
Beach Boys. I think changed. I think it was different. It was really different.
Did it seem dangerous at the time to listen to folks like that?
It was very exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan's show, I was right there screaming at the TV, with my sisters and my brother. But it was really, really different. And I don't remember my parents ever saying, "Don't watch that," or it was nothing like that. It was just really different.
Yeah.
Hey, they're still rocking and rolling too, aren't they?
Where would you put in people like Hendrix and
yeah, I mean, if you talk solo artists,
are you talking about groups specifically?
if you talk bands, you got to go Zeppelin too.
Yeah.
Who else? They have the Ramones, which is like the start of punk rock.
Right.
Nirvana, as far as influence, I guess, in the early '90s. The Who, the Clash. I mean, the Doors. Now, individual artists, you got Hendrix, you've got Presley, you've got people like that. So, I don't know. I think it's hard to get away from the Beatles, and Zeppelin. That's hard to get away from overall. They've had time too to influence people. Now, my generation, it's Nirvana, it's Metallica. It was those groups.
Yeah,
what's funny is
I'm sort of in between you guys because when we were rolling through, I mean, I graduated in '87, so you have a lot of the hair bands and things of that era, and you kind of dismiss a lot of that as pop and whatever. But then you have like Guns N' Roses that comes through and opens a lot of the doors up for more, and then really sort of a resurgence of some of the things that we'd seen before. I mean, Ozzy was still making music, and you have the continuance of the Rolling Stones through that era as well. I mean, these guys are still putting out albums. So if you want to talk about longevity, maybe you throw them in there as the top group. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Rolling Stones. No, goodness, they've been around forever. Aerosmith. I mean, there's bands that's just been around. I don't know. I'm just looking at
which
the list.
group irritated the most people. Maybe that's how we rank it. How many parental groups protested their music? How many of them were kicked out of? I mean, the Rolling Stones were banned in Arkansas, like after for 20-something years.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they came through, and I think Keith Richards or somebody got busted with marijuana, and so they actually they were banned, or maybe they was a self-imposed ban. It's like, we're never going to play there again because of the way you treated us. But anyway,
He was talking about Ozzy. Black Sabbath is 85. Guns N' Roses, 92.
Sabbath was 70 when they first hit.
No, I mean the ranking.
Oh,
in the
ranked?
top 100 artists.
Oh, I thought you were saying year.
No.
Oh, wow.
AC/DC's on here too.
Okay. The Thunder from Down Under.
Yeah, we're running out of time here. I would like to explore music more. I like this topic. There's probably, I don't know.
All right, so will you say your top one before you cut the thing?
I got to go Beatles. My number one would be Beatles. My number two would be Rolling Stones. As far as probably just impact, Rolling Stones, of course, for longevity. Once again, and Zeppelin.
All three are British bands.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about American bands later. I don't know. If I went personal preference, what impacted me?
Yeah.
That is from this list. I mean, I'm a big Dave Matthews fan from the 90s. That's how I learned to play guitar. But I listened to Guns N' Roses. I listened to AC/DC. I listened to Nirvana. Radiohead's on here. I remember them. Metallica, I listened to them. And
All
of course,
right,
Skynyrd.
let's rank it this way.
Skynyrd at number 95.
Put some Skynyrd on there. Let's rank it this way. How many times have you heard any of those other bands, like the newer ones, say, well, they're the new Beatles, they're the new Rolling Stones, they're the new Zeppelin. So if your band is being compared to these other ones, then obviously they're better.
Right, yeah, that's true. I don't know. What type of music? What's your favorite type? Is it rock of some sort?
Yeah, well, I mean, I listen to everything, but if I have my preference, then it's some sort of classic rock.
Yeah, Franklin's always got something going on in his classroom, some sort of music.
But I like the
playing.
new stuff too. I mean, hey, kids were listening to it. They're like, "What is that, Bangarang?" I'm like, yeah, it sure was.
I'm not up with all of that.
Yeah.
I'm more country though.
Oh, I hear you. No, country's huge. You know what's going to be funny is when we become, or when I get older, my generation gets older, there's going to be people my age when they're 72, gray hair, grandkids, and they're going to be bumping Snoop in their car. Because you generally keep listening to the same music you listened to when you were a kid, or 18, to 20s.
I listened to 60s, 70s, 80s, coming to school, bluegrass, and country. I switch it back and forth.
There you go. All right, everybody. This has been episode 2 of History After Hours. Once again, you can follow us on Twitter at History Hours PC. At History Hours PC. You can find us on Twitter, and we'll post the uplink. We're also on YouTube at historyhours.com. And I guess that's it.
That's it.
All right, everybody.